to another Character Strong webinar. It's always fun to interact with friends digitally. And today we get to be with a very special friend of mine. So one of my favorite things is sharing people that I care about and love and admire with other people that I care about and admire. So for those of you tuning in live or those of you rewatching this webinar later, I'm thrilled that you're here. And today's conversation is one that feels not only necessary in terms of reinventing some traditions that we just might hang on to simply because this is the way we've always done it before, but also I think super practical for something that just about every secondary school, especially at the high school level, deals with, which is the beautiful and sometimes dreaded homecoming week and process. So grateful that you're here today. If you're just showing up, I would love for you in the chat to introduce yourself, where you're coming from, the role maybe you play in your school or your district. It's always fun to see where people are showing up from. And as a reminder, everything that goes in that chat box is private. I'm the one that's able to see that and parse through that info. So I will be the one taking that in. And if at any point along the way you have a question, know that it's private and know that I'll be looking at that so that when we have some time at the end, we can take a look at a few of those questions and go from there. So thanks for joining us today on a Character Strong webinar. For those of you who are here live, as a thank you, we always appreciate when people take the time to tune in. And so as a result, if you do go ahead and introduce yourself in that chat box, then you'll be entered for an opportunity to win a free registration at one of our one-day educator trainings, which are all about weaving social emotional learning and character development into the daily fabric of your school. They're really just a solid, foundational, and hyper-practical day talking about how we shift school culture, which is sometimes this really big abstract concept that Character Strong, our goal is to make it more concrete, more practical, and something that you can go back and implement in your school right away to see a positive impact on those behaviors that we know shape really everything else that we do. So introduce yourself if you're just showing up, and we will get rolling. Today's conversation is reinventing homecoming, an inclusive whole school approach, which I love. And today with me is my friend and one of my heroes, Jaime Johnson, who's a teacher and one of the student leadership advisors at Monroe High School, which I do have to acknowledge I grew up around the corner from, and they were our rivals.
That is true.
And so we have overcome our differences against all odds and to become friends later in life. I've had a chance, we've known each other for I think 8 or 9 years now, Jaime, and you've seen me speak in a variety of capacities. I've seen you present, and you've presented a bunch of really neat things to our state, and I've worked with so many kids that I admire and who have become incredible children and adults in the world now, in so much in part thanks to your influence. One of the most gifted and passionate educators I know, here to share a simple story about how they reframed this thing that so many schools participate in, homecoming. And just to give a little context, at Character Strong, we always think about this big idea of culture in these couple little categories, which helps us take big ideas and make them a little bit more manageable, at least in my brain. So we talk about the circles of culture often, which is like the first one, clarity. First of all, when we're talking about things related to culture, are we speaking a common language? What do we actually care about or value or believe in? Competence, which is to say, when it comes to culture, what do we actually know how to do? We talk about culture as behavior. So what are the behaviors that we're explicitly or implicitly teaching both students and staff? And then consistency, which of course is like, what are we doing over time? Not just like the one big thing or the big launch or the words that we put up on our walls, but how are we actually holding ourselves and others accountable to this ongoing pursuit of these meaningful, positive behaviors? That being said, today will be a really cool conversation, both in clarity and competence. So first of all, clarifying what homecoming actually is, right? What is the function of it in a school? And when we get clear on that, perhaps even in some paradigm shifting ways, well, that's going to drive our competence, which is what do we do next with this really cool opportunity that so much of schools typically participate in. So what does that look like for you? Jaime, tell us the story of how Monroe High School reinvented homecoming a bit.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me first, Houston. And that was a very nice compliment for many reasons, but I appreciate that introduction. So at Monroe High School, our homecoming looked very traditional to every other homecoming. 4 years ago, we decided to sit down and really talk about that tradition of homecoming and what the importance of it was, and why we have homecoming. And so simply homecoming is really to welcome alumni back to our home, to their high school and to where they came from. And so we talked about that, and we talked about what that's morphed into over the years in high schools. And it's really about celebrating the high school, about celebrating of the school, and about celebrating the people within the school. And so then we looked at our court process, which for the traditional court process, it really is the top 1% that ends up being acknowledged and recognized for being on court. It's usually through student voting, sometimes through teacher nominations. But then we celebrate, for us, it was 10 seniors is what we celebrated by having an all school assembly. So we literally had 1,600 kids come together to celebrate 10 kids. And if you sat back and thought about it for a minute, you're like, there's a lot of really great things happening at our high school. There's a lot of really great people that are doing amazing things to serve others, to grow, to be better humans. Why aren't we recognizing that? That's what makes us who we are. That's what we value as a high school. So we really looked at the fact that our coronation process was not aligning to the values of our school. And so we sat down in a committee. We had some of my ASB leadership kids in there. The principal was in there and I was in there. And we had that conversation about what our values are and to make sure that our actions were aligned to that. And so we realized with court, it's not. And so what could we do to make that more aligned to who we are and what we are? And so what we came up with was well, it's a three-part process, really. But what it does is it looks at the people who are exhibiting strong character and the people that are involved in different activities throughout the high school and recognizing them for their actions rather than just for the popularity contest behind it, or just for literally getting votes during a student vote. So how our court process started 4 years ago is that we had each club and each sport nominate 2 seniors that were exhibiting good character, that were being good humans. We talked about when they went to nominate that they looked at different character traits. So being honest, being respectful, pushing themselves, working hard, serving others in a variety of capacities. And so then the clubs and sports chose how they wanted to nominate their 2 people. I left that up to them. So some people did, or some groups will do votes within it. Some would nominate themselves as the advisor or the coach. However that wants to look like to you is however it can look like. After that part, we gathered all those nominations and we would look through them. And so sometimes there was a kid who would get nominated for more than one club or sport. And so we had that conversation and discussed what that looks like for us. And so sometimes we go back to the advisor and be like, hey, this kid was nominated for one sport or a club. Like, do you want to nominate someone else so that you can get more people that are doing great things too? And so we've had that look different over the years. Some kids get nominated for multiple things and we celebrate them for multiple clubs or sports. A lot of times we do that differently so we can really recognize all the people that are doing great things. The question that we went back to pretty consistently to make sure that we were doing what we were focusing on for our school was that we focused on meeting the needs of others and meeting people where they're at. And so as we were defining and redefining our process and our tradition of homecoming court, what could we do that would allow people to feel comfortable with the change while also making a necessary change and the change really too was instituted by the idea of being more inclusive and really like putting that at the forefront of our thought process rather than just doing what we've always done. Which I love that you said that because it's always my favorite thing to talk to kids about is like, well, why do we do powder puff? And they're like, well, we've always done powder puff. And I'm like, well, why? And they can't usually answer the why. And so I appreciate having that conversation because it digs into a really good conversation about what traditions are and if they're still relevant. And then if they're not, like, how can we continue the tradition, but just make it relevant to our times? And I think as we get older as a country, like we're going to hit that more and more where we have to go back and look at our traditions. So yeah, so that's kind of where our thought process came from, and where we then extended out on how we wanted to run our court. We still do underclassmen court through teacher nomination and through student votes. And so there's two people nominated from the freshman, sophomore, and junior class. And we also do, we have two kids from Life Skills that we recognize every year as well that are a part of our homecoming royalty, which is always a joy. So back to the seniors. With the seniors, when they got nominated, they entered into a 3-part competition. The first year we did this, we had a Harry Potter homecoming theme, and so it tied in really well to that because it's all competition based. And so we created like a Monroe High School Cup. And then as the seniors were introduced, they actually pulled a card out of the out of the wizard hat to decide what house they were going to be in. And then they would go to that house. And so each house represented a different class at the high school graduating class. Which was really fun for them. The second part was that they entered into a food drive. We wanted some aspect of service to be implemented into it. And so we focused on a food drive because it's around a good time of year to do that. The food bank needs that opportunity. And it was a good way to engage the student body while also making it like pretty open and easy for people to participate. And so their votes as a senior to, I'm rambling a little bit, aren't I? Thank you. To get onto court was one, through their nomination of their club and their group, and then number 2, through their service project of collecting food, and then student voting. The third piece we did the first year, and we've changed it since then, is during our like homecoming pep assembly, we did a Kahoot based off of Monroe High School traditional like information. And then that was actually the third component that we used into tally to figure out who our top 10 was and then who our top 2 royalty were. The picture on your screen right now is part of our process that we changed. And so instead of doing a coronation assembly, we switched that to a homecoming kickoff assembly that we did the Friday before homecoming. What we focus on in this assembly is kicking off the idea of homecoming. We explain the different events that are going to happen the next week. We like make sure the theme is really announced. And this is where we take the time to nominate or to recognize all of our nominees for homecoming court. And so it gets a little crowded on the court as they get introduced. But we introduce each club and sport one at a time, and they're usually decked out in something that represents who they are or who they were nominated for. So art club has done like some like big paintings before, or like made like a big paintbrush. Sports usually come out with like their different sports regalia. This year we had wrestling out in their singlets, you know, like just normal things. And so we come out and we recognize them, and we usually decide as a group like how we want to do the service project. And so most years we have the seniors break up so that they're with each class, just like we did the first year with Harry Potter. And so the cool thing about that is that it allows each class to also help raise food and money for the food bank. And that food goes into their class competition. So then there's a class competition throughout the week. And then we get to the pep assembly on Friday of homecoming. And we announce the class winner of that based off of how much food was brought in and some different components throughout the year that just look like your normal Spirit Week kind of stuff. Let's see what's next. This is our coronation dessert. So we did want to have a chance where parents and family members could come together to honor and recognize their kids and recognize the great things that they were doing. And so we turned it into an evening event where more family members could come. So we have a dessert and we do a little program. At the end, this is what it looks like, is a whole bunch of kids coming together, and their family and friends are there to support them and love them. And it's a fun event, and I enjoy it, and it just creates a good feeling throughout the week. When it comes to homecoming day, so like the Friday of homecoming, we have them all come together. We have our pep assembly. We announce our top 10 at the pep assembly. And so we've simplified our process a little bit. We took out the Kahoot game at the pep assembly because it was stressful to figure out the top winners immediately. And so this gives us a little more time. And so at the pep assembly, we introduced the top 10 and sometimes 12 royalty just based off of numbers. And then at halftime, we announced the top 2 royalty. And And so it's always a fun process to look at who gets to that top 10, because really, like, in order to get there, you have to do the food drive as well as get student votes. And so it still ties in some of the tradition of that is long lasting of student voice, but also allows the kids that really put effort into the food drive to get recognized for that. And so this is our halftime last year, because this year it was pouring down rain, so we didn't take pictures. But this is them being recognized at halftime. They also walk out, and then we crown the top two. And it's fun to have the crowd there too, and the community there. As homecomings morphed and as laws have gotten stricter and stricter, it's harder to involve the community and involve the alumni back into homecoming. And so this is a really good way for us to do that when they're all there at the game. Let's see. So there's that part. I was thinking what I want to tell next. What do you want me to tell you next?
No, I think this is a great sort of like overview of how it plays out. And I think for me, just so that I'm understanding, and maybe helps the people who are listening understand, maybe we just like break it down into like the distilled steps that if someone were to be interested in implementing this now, what does it look like? And so I was just like sort of listening to how you've processed it. Number one, which I think is like in line with our circles of culture, you talk about, first of all, like clarifying what are our values, and then do our actions align, which I think is always just like a great baseline question that we can go back to with our leaders, which is just because we've done something one way, does that guarantee that it aligns with what we actually care about? Right. And to make sure that I'm hearing it right, you said that your values in some capacity are like, are we meeting the needs of others? Yes. And are we meeting them where they are at? Right. I think are two great, simple questions that anytime we're planning an event, like start there, right? Start with the why, start with the clarity piece. Yes. And then from there, it sounded like every club and sport gets an opportunity to nominate two people. Mm-hmm. And you were inclusive in that approach, right? Not only just athletics, we're talking activities, we're talking life skills. Mm-hmm. All these different organizations get to nominate two. You bring them all together, and then you make sure that like people, if they're nominated twice or whatever, we have opportunities to get as many people as involved as possible. Right. So now you have this like huge pool of people, which is really neat. And then the distillation process now looks like, in order to make it to that picture at the homecoming game, there's a food drive component. Mm-hmm. And what are the other two?
Student voting. And then voting. The third piece that you can do if you want to is to add a competition aspect to it at the pep assembly. Cool. We chose to take it out after a couple of years just because it was stressful in figuring out the final voting immediately. It's fun to do. But so we take those two. We take the food drive component and the student voting, and tally the votes together to get their total.
Yeah, beautiful. So you've narrowed the field by, first of all, bringing to the forefront people who are demonstrating the behaviors that you want to see in the school, which is student and sometimes even staff nominated, which is really neat. So there's like a lot of voices contributing to that, but it's not just a straight up popularity contest. It's like you wouldn't just vote on the top 10 people in your school. So there's the number one paradigm shift. You've included a service component to the food drive. And then there's the option, of course, schools can get creative in whatever their community looks like, but that competition piece can probably be a fun thing, whether that is service oriented, whether that is live at a pep assembly, whether that's another thing where maybe they're pursuing like character goals and you're able to like somehow quantify that. The competition piece could be a really neat thing. So those are like the metrics that you then distill that all the way down to what we saw in this picture here and this picture here. And I love this idea, which you mentioned. There's like a component that's sometimes missing in the whole process, which is like families who are really excited about this, having access to be able to see them, not just like during a school day, during a pep assembly where a lot of families can't make it, but you do it as a dessert celebration where families are there and you can see people with their phones out, like taking pictures of a really wide variety of people that doesn't look like maybe your quote unquote traditional homecoming court, which is pretty neat.
It definitely like pulls from all sectors of our school, and we've done a good job at having a variety of clubs too, and sports, and so it really it is able to pull a lot of different types of kids together that are doing weird things. So that traditional recognition piece for the great things they're doing. And so it's also great just for them to understand that people see that and see that influence that they're creating without sometimes realizing that they're creating it. So yeah, so that you summarized it very well, Houston. But yeah, so clubs and any group like nominates 2 people. Most years, most groups nominate. Sometimes they don't have seniors in their group, or they just don't do it, and so you kind of have that's one of the shifts in it is it does take a little more work because you're relying on other people to get you the information that you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we tally those votes together, and then we send them. The first year with Harry Potter, we sent them Owl Post because it was Harry Potter, telling them that they made it onto court. We then hold a meeting with them to really go through all of the steps of court and what they're getting themselves into and why they were nominated. And so then after that piece, we do the kickoff assembly, and so we explain what they need for that. And which really is just like representing their club or their sport. And then we always get them company sashes too, court sashes, and wear those in as well. And they usually do some sort of like handshake or like high five thing or like some movement together that they want to do to celebrate who they are. And then starting at the kickoff assembly is when we start the service component because we break them up into the classes. And then how that works for tallying and for voting is that every day that the seniors bring food in, they bring it in to me first, and then we count it. And then I keep an Excel spreadsheet for the totals for the day, for each day of the week. And then at the end, we total them up to get our top 10 out of that. And then they take the food down to our pack where all the food resides for the week. And then if kids from their class that they're representing, so for instance, if the seniors were drawn to like work with the freshmen can also collect food for specific people, and they can bring that food in and we tally that for that person too, and they take it down, which adds like a second layer of collaboration and of just community building that you can support the people around you in different ways. We also will accept money too, and we've had different feedback on this because some people are like, well, you can buy your way into it, and I go back and forth about that comment because I'm like, well, all of the money is going to the food bank, so it's going to people who need food. Also, when you are able to present money to the food bank, they can buy fresh food, and so it's benefiting our community in multiple ways by having better health, by making sure that kids are well fed, so that they can then come to school and learn, which obviously is going to help them in the future. And so that is one thing that we battle is that idea, which is why that third component of the competition during the pep assembly can even that playing field a little bit. But the other component is that you do also have to have student votes. And so even if you fundraised a lot of food, if you fundraised a lot of money, you also need the student vote to counteract that. You can't win with one way or the other. They have to both come together to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The balanced out approach is just being thoughtful, especially like depending on your school community. There's ways to make sure that you're approaching that so it's equitable and people have access from all the different angles, which is great. And I think it's important to note something you said earlier, where it's like it does require a little bit more work because you're relying on some other people to get some of this input. But I think it's like a great reminder to me. There's a couple things. Number one of my favorite Dale Carnegie quotes, which is people support a world they helped create. Which is, so you're automatically creating more buy-in in this assembly, where so often you bring 1,800 kids into the gym to watch sometimes the same 10 kids that are always being highlighted.
Yes.
And now you have 1,780 kids or 90 kids watching the same 10 kids, which means automatically there's less buy-in right off the bat versus if I'm a kid who's part of a group that's maybe not celebrated or recognized as often, and I'm seeing one of my friends up there, that changes my whole experience at assembly because I'm invested in my friend versus like these people that I see up there all the time.
Yes.
So to me, in my brain, it's a little bit extra work, but the payoff on the far side is such a big deal because we're inviting equity work would tell us that we can't wait for people to come to us.
Right.
Equity says, I have to go to you. Like that's like my job as leaders in a position of privilege or access is to go to you and say, no, we need your help to make this real. We need you to make this better. And we want your voice in this process, even if it means a little bit more work on my end, because the payoff is so great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I never regret hard work, and I've never regretted this. It's been rewarding in multiple multitude of ways. To watch kids come together to work together to create something for other people, I always think is beautiful. And so the ability for the kids to come together and to collect food and to compete with each other on collecting more food, like that's what we should be recognized for. We shouldn't be recognized for getting a vote. And they've raised tons of money. We've raised over like $14,000 in the last 4 years and like 12,000 pounds of food. And so I'm like, that for me outweighs anything that then like just standing up there in a robe and a crown does.
Yeah.
And I love that aspect of it. So no, the work is totally worth it.
Yeah, and I imagine like any other paradigm shift, there's going to be discomfort at first because people say, "Wait a second, this isn't how we've always done it." So having some of that, the clarity in your values and why we're doing it is a big deal. I imagine both for you as the advisor, but of course that meeting you described earlier, where people are coming together to talk about why you were chosen and why we're doing this process, to me is also a really key ingredient so that students can advocate it from their own voice. So it's not just top down. You're saying, no, students, like, this is why we're doing this. And if people ask, like, be equipped to speak into why this is important. And I think it's cool to acknowledge, like, you ended up being on the local news, right? As a result of, like, the news covered this.
Yeah. King 5 came out and covered it, and it was also in the paper. Which was slightly stressful, but also worth it.
Sure. But I think to me, it's like such a cool reminder that, that sometimes we get so caught up in like thinking like, oh, we've always done it this way, so we got to do it again, and we got to do it like bigger and better than it's ever been, and we need the best theme, and it's going to be, and we think like, I think the traditions and maintaining them, that's the paradigm we hold, is like we got to do it bigger and better,
right.
And that's what's going to draw the attention. But in reality, sometimes the thing that's going to draw the most meaningful attention, like the news coming to see you, isn't because you did it bigger or better, you had a better theme or interesting decorations than the year before. It's because you did it entirely different. And you approached it in a way that broke tradition, which to me I think is always going to be more interesting than like making tradition bigger. Like what can we do to break paradigms, especially when we realize that they're not serving the most people or people who have the most need, or they're not serving people in the most interesting, meaningful way. So I so appreciate the paradigm shifts that are offered here. I hope that advisors watching, or even students that end up watching this, can take some of these tools. And I know you've done it in the context of your school, but I'm sure the conversation here, people can go back to their school and say, what does this look like for me? Mm-hmm. How do I break, whether it's homecoming or another event that we have on our campus? Yes. How do we ask those, first of all, those tough questions? Why do we do this? Does it serve people? Are we meeting people's needs? Are we meeting people where they're at? And then how can we do this in a way that is, that when we take time to recognize people, how do we make sure that we're not only recognizing maybe some of the traditional things we recognize, but what can we do more and more to make sure we're recognizing service and compassion and empathy and resilience and all those things that we know are just as important, but sometimes take the back seat because it's not the way we've always done it.
Exactly. And we've done a lot of work to really focus on action, and that words don't mean a lot, and that it's really the action behind it that means the most. And so creating opportunities to allow that to happen is something that the kids take pride in, and something that they've really shifted in. And I think if you look at culture too, the kid in high school right now is very different than the kid that was in high school 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And they were different things. And they're exposed to a world that 5 years ago they weren't exposed to. And we have to adapt to that if we want to keep our traditions alive and growing, and to really honor like who our students are and how that creates a school.
Yeah, things change. We better keep up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jaime, for your insight, for your heart, for pushing on kids in ways that are meaningful and paradigm shifting, right? The way that we think about a thing shapes the way we act with a thing. Mm-hmm. And reinventing homecoming, I think, is a necessary iteration in a culture that's always shifting. And we better adapt in ways that are meaningful and hopefully along the way serve others. Yes. In many ways, that's what the work that we do at Character Strong is to help clarify and create competencies and overall consistency in the young people we serve. And so one of my favorite tools that we offer is the Character Strong Leadership Curriculum, which I know I've had a chance to talk a little bit about with your students in the past, at least some of the paradigm shifts around servant leadership versus traditional leadership. So just so the folks watching know, one of the things we offer is a semester-long leadership class. And some schools use it as a year-long leadership program. It's 90, 60-minute lessons that are designed to talk about leadership through that lens of service, through some of those paradigm shifting lenses that can have a real impact on your activities. So it's not just project planning, but people impacting. And for those of you tuning in, thank you so much for showing up here live. I wanted to celebrate all of you, but want to let you know, Heather Forelez from Kansas, I want to send you a free registration. We don't have one in Kansas, but we do have them in your next door neighbor, Missouri. I'll be leading one soon, so I'll make sure to get your free registration your way, and I would love to join you, hopefully in Missouri, talking about this, not just in a short webinar, but at length for a full day together. So I'll send that your way. Heather, thanks for being here live. And Jaime, thank you so much for all that you do, not only over the past 8 years, just being an advocate in my life, but for the students that you've served for many years in the role that you play as teacher and mentor and friend. I know you got a lot of students who look at you as a friend and mentor. So you do incredible work, and I appreciate you a lot.
Thank you, Houston. I appreciate you.
Thank you all for joining us on another Character Strong webinar. We got planes flying overhead. It's time to depart. You all have a beautiful day, and we'll talk to you soon.